Ferdy, can I invite you to the front and si Toffee also? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our regular Tuesday meeting of the 23rd of August, 2022. I'd like to turn the floor over to our President, Michael Escalator, to call the meeting to order.
I hereby call this Rotary Club meeting to order.
Thank you, President Michael. Next, I'd like to call our Rotary member who we don't see very often to do the invocator. And he lives in Canada. That's why we don't see him often. Toffee, retired Toffee Concepcion. He's also slimmed down quite a bit. Didn't recognize him. We'd like to request everyone to stand up for the opening prayer.
Dear Lord, we praise you and we thank you for all the gifts you give us. It's been almost 3 years since I've been able to join you, and we always have to be thankful for the gift of life. Many of my good friends have gone since those years, and I never even was able to say goodbye. So every day we thank the Lord for the blessing of life, for the blessings of friendship, and the blessings of getting together with friends on occasions like this. Lord, bless us and the work that our organization does, because we truly are a light. I see our projects, I see the Viber groups, and I see the impact we make on people's lives. We take this maybe sometimes we take it for granted, but when you get to see the comments of these people and you get into their Facebooks, get to see the impact we have on their lives, generational changes. We actually make changes that impact whole families and future generations. And we don't realize the impact that we make on people doing that. And so, Lord, I thank you for the blessing of this club, the blessing of our wonderful members, and may you continue to bless us. Amen.
Thank you, retired Toffee. Next, we have the Philippine National Anthem to be followed by the RC Makati hymn. Thank you. Now for the Rotary hymn.
together we stand proud. We are leaders with integrity, always ready to serve humanity, always living by the four-way test, building goodwill and peace along the way, giving hope to the world. We're the Rotary Club of Makati, prepared to aid our fellow men, as true Rotarians we live to lead. We believe in service above self, and this is why we succeed. We're the Rotary Club of Makati, and together we stand proud. We are leaders with integrity, always ready to serve humanity, always living by the four-way test, building goodwill and peace along the way, giving hope to the world. We're the Rotary Club of Makati, giving hope to the world. The Rotary Club of Makati.
Thank you. So next we have the four-way test. We'd like to remind everyone about our four-way test, something that we have to keep in mind and try and practice every day. First, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you. Thank you. Please have a seat. Okay, next, I'd like to greet our birthday and wedding anniversary celebrators today. Among our Rotarians, actually, this is for the month of August. No? So among our Rotarians, the Director Bom Villatuya birthday is 31st of August. Johnny Tan, the 2nd of September. IPP Louis Eseoche, the 4th of September. And Rotarian Mike Toledo, the 4th of September. Among our Rotarians, the following birthday celebrators are Micah Tambunting, the 24th of August. Jennifer De Jesus, the 3rd of September. Kaling Young, the 4th of September. Tessie Amparo, the 5th of September. And Bessie Cruz, the 5th of September. For wedding anniversaries, we have Elaine and Daniel Gashen on the 27th of August. Past District Governors Sid and Tesha Garcia on the 27th of August. June and Lucy Enriquez on the 2nd of September, and Dan and Brenda Lim on the 3rd of September. Congratulations and best wishes to all our celebrators for August. Next is a very important segment of our program. It's the recognition of Paul Harris Fellows. I'd like to turn the floor over to PDG Tony Kila to award our new Paul Harris Fellows.
Thank you, Director Philip. So may I call on our long-lost Rotarian, Tofi Concepcion, to get his 5th Paul Harris Fellow. So he will get a medal with 4 sapphire. President Michael, can you please do the honors? So I will wait for them. So Then may I call on Rotarian Neil Makasya to get his third Paul Harris Fellow. A pin with 2 sapphires. Tofi, can you stay so we can have a group picture?
You get the job wherever you can. What were you connected on? Oh, so you're which bank? Los Baños.
President Michael, can you stay so we can give the name tag as lifetime member to Julian Tiglao and I Galvez. I. So congratulations, they're new lifetime members.
Thank you, PDG Tony Kila, and congratulations to all our new Paul Harris fellows. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge our guests and visiting Rotarians. Let me start with our dignitaries today. With us today, you just saw PDG Tony Kila. For our guest, PDG means past district governor, which is the highest position that you can hold in the Rotary Club for the district. And so for our aunts who are joining us on Zoom, we have Ann Nelly Bengzon and Ann Yvonne Kwan. They're both joining us on Zoom. Welcome. For guests who are in the house with us today, I'd like to recognize Andrew Escaler, the son of President Michael Escaler. Where is Andrew? There's Andrew. Andrew, welcome. Father Bobby de la Cruz. Father Bobby, good to see you, sir. PP Megs Lon of RC Metro Calibo. Hi, PP Megs. Mr. Eckhart Wick, Eckhart Wick, the guest of Rotarian Keith Harrison. Okay, yeah. And then we have Alvaro Lon, guest of President Michael Escaler. Hopefully a new member. Alvaro was with us during the initial induction meeting at the Manila Polo Club about a month ago. And of course, we have Nico Sunga, guest of Tito Padillo, who I believe will be joining the club. Right, Nico? You've been with us third meeting already, I think, right? Yeah. So we have 2 new members at today's meeting. Thank you very much for joining us. So with that, let's move on to the next item of the program. There's an update on the San Lakbay project from Father Bobby de la Cruz. Father Bobby.
Pero ang sinasabi sa atin yun, ang Diyos ay pagmamahal, bumangon ka ngayon din. Patuloy mo ang paglalakad, huwag kang titigil. Kung bumagsak ka, bangon uli. Bagsak na naman, bangon uli. Walang katapusan ang ating pagbangon dahil walang katapusan din ang ating kahinaan. Mananatili ang kahinaan natin. Hindi mawawala ito, pero kaya itong daigin. Hindi ng lakas natin, kundi daigin ng pag-ibig ng Diyos.
Good afternoon to all of you, Rotarians, and I would like to congratulate the newly installed president, Mr. Michael Escaler, the members, and also the officers and advisors of this group. Well, my name is Father Bobby de la Cruz. I'm a priest of the Archdiocese of Manila, and I'm the priest in charge of San Lakbay program, the drug recovery program of the Archdiocese under Caritas Manila. You know, Caritas Manila is also the social service arm of the Archdiocese. Drug addiction is a social malady. We know all of this. I do not need to emphasize how grave its effect is, not only in our country, but more so to our communities and to numerous families directly hurt by this. Even in an ideal situation, recovery can be very difficult, much more now with the pandemic. Since the very beginning, the club, the Rotary Club of Makati, has been a partner, a collaborator to address this unfortunate ill of our society. We are truly very thankful. Your help really pulled us through. It's a kind of a narrow door, this recovery effort for the drug addicts. Since we started, we already have 615 graduates under our program, and currently, since the reopening of parishes, we have now 111 surrenderers who are now undergoing rehabilitation. We have opened an aftercare program done in our office, but since we will be rolled out to parishes. Now, I would like to share with you the good news. San Lakbay was recently awarded just early this year as a national model for community-based rehabilitation program. The award was given to us by the Dangerous Drugs Board, DDB's policy-making body of the government for drug-related activities. All this became possible because of our partners like you. Now, in this regard, in confidence of this partnership, let me again knock on your generosity. 5 years ago, you gave us a vehicle, a van that was really used to facilitate many of our programs. This was fully utilized, especially during the pandemic, distributing rice and other food for them. And however, with the growing number of needs, we needed a bigger passenger van. So I'm just appealing if there's a second-hand passenger van that could carry at least 20 sacks of rice, because fortunately we were given a regular supply of this by another manufacturer. It's just for us to use to mobilize this, distributing to Metro Manila. And again, thank you very much. We pray for you, and you pray for us also.
May I just have your brief attention? I invited Father Bobby here just to give us an update on our drug rehab project. As you know, I started this in 2017 during my term as president, and we've continued to support this project up to now. Because of budget limitations, I'm not able to give one of the requests of Father Bobby for that they need for the program. And this is, he was asking for a closed van that they can use to carry sacks of rice and food that will be given to a lot of the graduates of the program who actually need a lot of support after they have been able to graduate from the program. So I'm reiterating his request that if any of you, either personally or you know other people who might have a second-hand closed van that can carry sacks of rice, maybe around 20 or 25 sacks of rice, please let me know. And if you are willing to donate this vehicle, all the better, so that San Lakbay will have some means to be able to distribute this assistance, the continued assistance that the graduates need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Past President Junjun. Before we proceed with the program, I'd like to call Governor PDG Tony Kila back to the podium, to award Paul Harris Fellows to our very important first Anne and meron bang first son?
So President Michael, can I call on Andrew Escaler for his Paul Harris Fellow? And then Benjamin Escaler is not here, so maybe we'll call First Lady Papat. Papat and Michael will shortly be Major Donor Level 3. As a major donor, you given a crystal which is forthcoming. Wala pa. Wala pa yung crystal. So this is for Benjamin. Para family. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Papat and Andrew, on your Paul Harris. Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's proceed with the rest of the program. Next, we have the President's time. President Michael.
Good afternoon to everybody. Somebody just mentioned to me that in my term, there's a lot of new Rotary members. And I want to thank in particular Tito Panlilio for getting a lot of members to our new Rotary Club. The past 2 weeks have been a whirlwind of activity for the club. A positive development any president would welcome with joy in the heart. It's gratifying to notice our projects moving forward and to see our members stepping up to the plate to get things done. A shower of thank you is in order. Number one, for hosting the first mini social for this Rotary year. I would like to thank our baby Rotarian, Winston Oy, and his wife, Anne Adet. Winston and Adette opened their beautiful home at the BGC to the 16 members of the NANs who graced the mini social they hosted last August 15. We hope that we can schedule another mini social soon and that those who get invited will take the opportunity to be there and help us keep the momentum going. The purpose of all these mini socials is really to get those people who are not so involved in our club to be more involved, because we have a lot of membership and only a few are really committed. So we want to really capture those new members and help them to get committed. The next item is the revival of our Interact Club. Thank you to Dr. Julian Lim, Julian, Tony Lopez for taking time to meet with the principal of the General Pio del Pilar National High School in Makati to discuss the project of reviving the Interact Club we sponsored in the school for many years, but which by some unfortunate turn lay dormant in recent years. For the kitchen rehab in Tondo, thank you to IPP Louis Asioche, also my idol, President nominee Keith Harrison, also my idol, PP Junjun Dairit, also my idol, visiting our feeding program site in London to hand over our donation for the renovation of the kitchen where Caritas Manila volunteers prepare meals for 157 children enrolled in the parish supplemental feeding program, which is sponsored by our club. For the Saving Ruby project, I would like to thank Director Andrew Prieto and Treasurer Tony Lopez for meeting with Dr. Alan Racho of St. Luke's, Quezon City last August 17. The first step in stepping up a new health project meant to help children afflicted with leukemia. For the cancer screening in Caloocan, thank you, Past President Cesar Campos, cervical cancer screening project for 100 workers of Frabel Food in Caloocan last August 18. Special thanks again to Dr. Andrew and baby Rotarian Neil Makasayar for taking an active role in this activity. For the ocular inspection at Dow Chemical, thank you to our foundation chairman, Louis Aseoche, past president, Charlie Rufino, and past president, Carlo Rufino, for making time last August 19 to visit the Dow Chemical to conduct an ocular inspection of our property in Las Piñas. I would like to thank Rotarian Rick Santos for sending a representative from his company to help us with the appraisal of the property. For the second relief mission for earthquake victims, I would like to thank Director Boom Villatuya for sending most of his weekend on the road, delivering evidence to the earthquake victims in Vigan and Abra last August 19 and 20. A total of 29 homes were given construction materials to enable team to start repair of their homes, to be overseen by RC Vigan and RC Banguet. The team also was able to touch base with their brother club, RC Narvacan, to discuss a nutrition program we are planning to put up for 150 kids. And lastly, for the tree planting at Echo Park last Saturday, I would like to thank President nominee Keith Harrison, past President Junjun Dairit, baby Rotarian Neil Makasiar, and members of the Rotary Club of Makati for joining me at the D8 3830 tree planting activity. We were able to plant 55 siblings, our humble contribution to keep the place green as ever. We also had a chance to check out the drinking stations installed by the club. I understand the whole project is aiming at 1 million trees to keep the floods from eroding our land and to help the environment. So I thank you for a very active year of the Rotary. We have just begun. We're only 2 weeks into this activity. It seems like a long time because we've done so much. And I'm looking forward to more of these activities that really help our indigent Filipinos. Thank you, George. It's nice to see you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next, we have the introduction of our guest speaker today. I would like to call on Director Ferdy Odorvesa to introduce our guest speaker.
Good afternoon, gentlemen, fellow Rotarians. I'm here to introduce our speaker. His name is Fernando Antonio A. Tansingco, Toto for short. He is currently the Senior Executive Vice President and Head of the Financial Markets Sector for Metropolitan Bank and Trust Company. He has oversight of Treasury, Wealth Management, Private Banking, and Strategic Planning, and Asset Management. He also serves as the Vice Chairman of the Board for AXA Philippines and advisor to the Board of Metrobank China Limited and First Metro Investment Bank. Prior to joining Metrobank in 2007, he was the Treasurer, Head of Global Markets, and co-head of the Wholesale Bank for the Philippine branch of Standard Chartered Bank from 1997 to 2007. Toto holds a Chartered Financial Analyst designation from the CFA Institute and passed the Electrical Engineering Licensure Examination in 1988. Fellow engineer. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from the University of the Philippines and attended the Advanced Management Program of the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. He has also attended the International Management Program in the Euro-Asia Center of INSEAD. Toto is an active contributor to the development of the financial markets in the Philippines. He is a member of the Bankers Association of the Philippines, Capital Markets Development Committee, where he holds the vice chairmanship. Fellow Rotarians, let us all welcome our guest speaker, Toto Tansingco.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you. It's such an honor to be addressing you, especially with such a prestigious club. Thank you for inviting me. Our Director, Philip, President Descaler, thank you. Just wait for my presentation to load up. Okay. The presentation is called The Philippines' Resilience Amidst Headwinds. I'd like to take 4 points in this talk. First, back to normal. What does it look like? Second, reading the tea leaves. What do the current indicators tell us? What's happening in the world? Third, the Philippines braving the headwinds. And I'll dare to put our necks down the line and tell you our fearless forecast for the economy. So I'd like to start with a quote from Carlos Slim Helu. He's the CEO of Telmex and once the richest man in the world from 2010 to 2013. And this is a quote with good perspective on history. we can have a better understanding of the past, present, and a clear vision of the future. And this is very apt for my talk. The Philippines, the COVID crisis is perhaps the second biggest crisis in the Philippine history. If you look at World War II, our economy shrank by 70%. COVID was 21. If for those of you who remember the Asian financial crisis, when people were out on the streets losing jobs, that was just 12%. That was just a 12% decline. Aquino assassination, when people were out on the streets, that was only a 10% contraction of the economy. And yet here we are facing a 21% contraction. The global financial crisis, 2008, for the Philippines, that was just a 2.7% bump. So this global, this COVID is really a big, major event in Philippine history. But it is causing us a problem. It is causing us some blinders. You know why? Because of the impact of COVID, and we're saying, okay, we're going back to normal. We tend to think that normal is 2019. Normal was before we got into COVID. But in reality, we have to look at the events in context and in context of history. Next slide, please. So maybe we have forgotten that by 2019, we were actually the victim, or at least we've had 6 major events that has hit us. The Asian financial crisis, the asset bubble and the global financial crisis, the quantitative easing that the central banks in the world instituted, the rise of China, and Brexit. And why is this important? I'll probably elaborate a little more. And we probably tend to forget some of the recent events that have hit us. The return of inflation. 3 years ago, everybody was begging for inflation. You know, the US was saying, hey, there was no inflation. We have to bring inflation up because people are not spending anymore. Europe was saying, I want inflation. Japan has been begging for inflation. Well, I think it's careful what you wish for. Second is the normalization of China. One reason why there was no inflation was that China was the factory of the world and can contain inflation, right? So if people wanted goods in the US, China will just produce. If people wanted capital, you saw the Asian AIB, Asian bank that China put. They will just export capital. So that was China way back 2015. They were actually preventing inflation. But now what have we seen? China has focused back inward because of their own problems. They thought that it was going to be a ride to development. Guess what? That never happens. And the third thing we have to realize is the return of geopolitics. In the past, after the global financial crisis, the world actually held each other's hands and said, okay, we're going to get out of this crisis. There was a lot of cooperation. The central banks were cooperating, were helping each other. Now, no more. Now we see US against China, Europe against Russia, even sometimes Asia against the developed world. So the world has fragmented, and that harmony that we saw from the global financial crisis to date has now all but disappeared into regional interests. So what is the reality check? If we look back at where normal will be, it is not 2019. Normal is actually when Bernanke was when Greenspan was still Fed chairman. Because from the time of Greenspan until now, the world has been in, I would say, in a fairy tale. It has not been in a normal situation when relationships were out of whack. You know, interest rates were pushed too low, and there was such a thing called the Fed put, meaning the central banks, because they felt that the economies were very fragile, would, when the markets shake, all of a sudden cut rates to make the stock market, the real estate market, the bond market alive. That period has ended. And now we have to look back to Greenspan time, 2006 prior, to look at what is normal. This is a snapshot of how the markets looked like prior to this pandemic. So I'd like to focus everybody's thoughts, not on 2019, but on 2006. Think back how the situation was there. What was the interest rate environment? What was the credit environment? What was the growth environment? And we see that right after this crisis, right after the Asian financial crisis, right after the global financial crisis, there has to be a contraction. And there was, thankfully, the Philippines was able to escape a contraction in 2009. But in all other crises, there was contraction. So that is what we really should be looking at. And this is a slide of peso interest rates and dollar interest rates. Right now, why is this important? Why is the dollar interest rates important for a country like the Philippines? Because we have to maintain a healthy interest differential between the dollar and the peso, or else capital will flow out of the country. The average interest rate differential between the peso and the dollar has been 3.3%. Right now, we're only at 1.6. So what has been the impact in the past when the interest differential narrows? You see the weakness of the peso, which is exactly what we're seeing now. That happened in 2011, that happened in 1998. Whenever the interest differential narrows too much, you will see capital going out of the country. And that is, I think, a major concern that we have to be on guard today. What is the sustainable peso interest rates? Peso interest rates traditionally has been 80 basis points above the inflation rate. That has historically been the relationship, because narrower than that, people would rather spend their money. I mean, there's no point, right? Keeping your money in a bank or not spending it if next day it erodes. Guess where we are now? We are about 300 basis points lower than inflation. So what's that telling us? We are still in the midst of a transition, and these levels are not sustainable. And there are two ways of doing it. Either inflation goes down or peso interest rates go up. But clearly, if we keep to these levels, we are going to be pressured, and the pressure will continue. No matter what intervention the central bank does, no matter what we do, we have to go back to sustainable levels. This is a chart of the Philippine budget balance as a percentage of the GDP. The top line is the zero line. We've always run a deficit. And in a developing country, that's actually quite good. Our average has been around 2.9%. So where are we now? We're running 7.3%, 2.5 times bigger. In an economy like the Philippines, that means we are overspending or spending beyond sustainable by about 1 trillion pesos. Or another way of putting it, if we bring government spending back to sustainable norms, our GDP will contract by 4%. Because the only reason why our GDP is 7.1 is really because of government spending. But can we afford to do it right now? I think that's the question that all of us have to answer. So what is the point that I'm trying to make here? We are at unsustainable levels right now. And the only time that we can find stability is when several things should happen. Debt to GDP should go back to sustainable levels, which I would think 3 to 4%. The government doesn't expect that to happen until 2028. Inflation rate vis-a-vis peso interest rates should go back to sustainable level. So either inflation comes down or peso interest rates move up. But until those two happen, we will still be in a lot of pressure. Interest differentials, we have to maintain our interest differentials. Not only it has to happen, or else you will see capital flow out of the country. And exchange rate stability, which is, I think, an offshoot of getting all these macroprudential numbers aligned. And I'd like to quote from Carmen Reinhardt, a former World Bank chief economist and author of This Time is Different, 8 Centuries of Folly. If you can read her book, it's very, very interesting. Because a lot of times people say, oh, this time it's different, this time is different. But 8 centuries, proven time and time again. You cannot escape finance. The one common theme to the vast range of words financial crisis is excessive debt accumulation, whether it be government, banks, corporations, or consumers, often possess greater systemic risk than it seems during the boom. In other words, while the boom is happening, you think, hey, it's okay. I mean, this debt is good. But if you look at all the crises we've faced, Asian financial crisis, it was a crisis of debt. Corporates took up too much debt. Global financial crisis started by the US housing bubble that was caused by consumers taking up too much debt. And in the 80s, the collapse of Latin America and a lot of the countries, that was caused by too much government debt. Now, I think one of the scary things is a lot of governments are accumulating a lot of debt. So, what am I saying? There is no more Fed put. The central bank saw that the inflation genie is out of the bottle, and even if it means tanking their economies, they decided to put it back in. So in the past, I think we've had this comfort that the Fed or the central bank will say, okay, the markets are tanking, let's cut rates. Now it seems like it's time they're going to stay the course, and they've said so very publicly as a signal to us to prepare. So this is a chart of what the Fed has been doing versus what the BSP has been doing. And while the Fed started early, and at a certain level, the BSP was a bit in denial, I think the good thing about our policymakers is that they've quickly caught up. They did a surprise hike recently, and prior to that, they did another large hike. So this is a good sign that they've woken up to the reality that we're facing. But as I mentioned earlier, until we get back to those sustainable levels, we'll still be in a flux. And until now, the interest differential of the dollar and the peso is just too narrow. This is a chart of peso inflation, Philippine inflation and US inflation. If you look at the red line, this is very interesting. One of the statements that our economic managers keep on telling us is, yeah, this is transitory. Inflation is transitory. It's led by commodities. I mean, you're the experts on commodities. But I think one of the things that we have to be aware of is the trajectory. If you look at the red line, they've already turned the corner. And US interest rates are already on a downward trend. While we in the Philippines, look at the blue line, they're saying that it's going down. We haven't even turned the corner. We haven't had even a month or a month wherein inflation actually has slowed down. So inflation is still on an uptrend. And while we do hope that inflation will go down, we still haven't proven that we could do it. Not like the US when they've already proven that they can slow down inflation. And but not being a prophet of gloom, I know I'd like to hopefully end or continue this talk on a more hopeful note. And hats off to our monetary regulators, our economic managers. I think that they're doing an excellent job. Given its commitment to macroeconomic stability and unrelenting reform momentum, the Philippines is harnessing its potential to remain among the most resilient economies of today and become an economic powerhouse of tomorrow. And I really believe this statement, despite the gloom that I've been trying to show earlier. And what do I mean by this? GDP is still growing. Yes, it is prompted by government spending, but we're still at 7.1, one of the highest growing economies. Yes, we've had a low base, but at the very least, there's still enough confidence and there's still enough absorptive capacity of the economy to get this money and make it productive. Unemployment is coming off after the hike in the pandemic. It is now below 5%. And the more people we can employ, the better it will be. One, it creates economic activity. Number two is it creates the tax base to pay for that 1 trillion in excess spending that we're doing right now. So that is, I think, the good sign that we have. The demand side, while the GDP growth has slowed somewhat, our numbers are still positive. Imports is positive, exports is positive, investments is positive, consumer spending is positive, services sector is positive. That is a good sign. There is still economic activity and there is still confidence. I think that's the word we have to take, confidence. The bank wallets are still open. If you recall in 98 crisis, what's the first thing that banks did after the crisis? Stop lending. And what happened? All of us suffered. Thankfully, even with a 20% decline of the economy and 9% in 2020, banks are still open for business. Metro Bank's still open for business to lend. So I think that is a good sign, and that will actually give us the impetus to grow the economy. Markets are still liquid. There's still enough liquidity. I think the craziness that we've had in the 80s, wherein what was the prescription for an economic crisis? Tighten liquidity. The IMF would say, okay, put up reserve levels, tighten liquidity, stop lending. Yes, it kills inflation, but it kills economy. Good thing about it is we're no longer with that kind of Mad West. Local, there's still enough liquidity for you to conduct your business. And lower fiscal deficit targets. So the government is cognizant of the fact that this is unsustainable and unlike the US that is still spend, our government is now saying, hey, we have to rein in expenses. And we have to look at things that they used to say, like now PPP is back in vogue. From before, it was really, the government initiated. So that, I think, is the rationality. Peso yield curve is flattening. And what does this indicate? If the peso yield curve is flattening, people think that these high interest rates are temporary. Because if these high interest rates are permanent, then you would want to earn a high rate for long term. But if you look at it right now, the yield curve, that the 10 years and the 5 years is maybe about 1.5% difference. So there is belief, there is faith in our economy, and there is faith in our financial system. And while the current deficit is widening, and don't be frightened by the drop in our international reserves, we can sustain it. We've built up more than 100 billion, and now we're back to below 100 billion, still about 9 months of imports. But that's what those reserves are for times like this. So don't be scared that we're eating up our reserves. OFW remittances and BPOs, particularly BPOs, has been resilient. In fact, I was talking to a CEO of a bank, and they were saying with the US trying to get back the jobs to the US, they say, okay, they can get back the low jobs, but it is impossible. It is impossible for them to take the accountants, the engineering people, the tech support people, and put it in the US, simply because there's not enough engineers, accountants in the US to take these jobs back. So these BPOs are here to stay, and it will be resilient, and it will be sort of economy proof. While we lag in FDIs, and I think that this is something that I think all of us will have to try to work on, our FDI is still improving. So this is still considered a good sign. Okay, this is an interesting slide. This is called the real effective exchange rate. I think a lot of us are scared that the peso is, right now when I left the dealing room, 56.20. All-time high is 56.40. Is that a point of concern? If you look at this slide, this is called the REE, real effective exchange rate. Its base is 100 in 2010. So all countries base 2010. And our trade-weighted exchange rate is compared
Mr. Raul,
how our currency performs based on our trading partner, not only based on the dollar, which is what we really look at, but based on where our dollar goes to. And if you look at it, the Philippines REER is actually 110, despite us being at all-time high. So the peso is actually 10% more valuable than it is in 2010. Why do we feel that the peso is very weak? Because the dollar is very strong. The dollar strengthened. They had the same base, 100. It's now 129. So the dollar strengthened 30%. We strengthened 10%. Thus, you see that we're weak against the dollar. But if you compare us against other currencies, Indonesia actually is weaker than 2010. Thailand is actually just at the same level as 2010. China is strong. We know why that happened. EU is weaker and getting weaker. Right now, the euro is now 0.994. So less than 1:1. India, our BPO competitor, has actually weakened its currency as they lose competitiveness to us. So don't be scared of the peso. I think it's better to look at it in RE. Don't be scared of the dollar peso. Look at where we are in relation. Unfortunately, we cannot go on vacation to the US, but well, Europe might be better. Europe is very cheap right now. So maybe that's our next destination. So what were the impact that we have to be? There was this term, I don't know if you've heard of it, the term beggar thy neighbor. It is that breakdown when the central banks were all acting in concert since the global financial crisis to the selfishness, or for lack of a better term, that has happened. And what does this mean? The Fed will not bat an eyelash to bring the global economy down as long as it can protect the US economy. Japan would also do the same. They would depreciate their currency provided that they can protect their domestic economy. China is doing the same. They will do monetary stimulus, subsidies, whatever it takes to protect their economy. So the shining knight or the image that the US has been trying to cultivate, or China has been also trying to build up, of being the benign benefactor, I think that we have to dissociate ourselves from that notion. Every man for himself right now is perhaps the new reality that we have to face. And it is the beggar thy neighbor reality that unfortunately has dominated the financial system. And the modern monetary system, monetary theory. The theory goes like this. You can actually print money, as much money as you want, without backing, as long as you can balance out taxation and the printing, and this will not bring out inflation. And that was what was driving the central banks in the era from the 2009 global financial crisis to date. I think that this event has proven the vulnerability. This is a new theory. It's never been proven. It's only maybe 5 years old. I think I subscribe to Reinhardt's concern that debt is the problem, not liquidity. So in summary, markets will be in a flux. Please be prepared for a lot of volatility. Please be prepared for a lot of excitement, a lot of swings until we reach a sustainable levels. And my guess is sustainable levels is peso interest rates go to about maybe 1% above inflation. Peso interest differentials goes back to around 3.5. So we will be at flux until we get those levels. And any point before that, we have to consider as transitory. Second, back to reality. No more Fed put, no more central banks going to support the market. The governments are running out of room. We would have to protect ourselves. So, you know, I think caution is, we have good numbers, we have good economy, we have a lot of opportunities, but we have to always protect our tail. And number 3 is the resilience in the Philippine economy. It is a good story. We are much more resilient now than we ever were. So I think confidence, cautious confidence is what I would like to leave with. So, sticking my neck out here, but this is our assumption. We feel that the GDP will slowly go down as government spending goes down, and that's why we're going to go down from about 6.8 to around 6 to 7. Inflation, we believe that we're on the right track, but it's too early to tell, to be honest. We think that we could contain it to 5.6, and I think it's only 2023, 2024 when we think that we can get to inflation rates that are sustainable. Interest rate, base rate, we're going to 4 or even 5%. Today, we're auctioning off our retail treasury bond. I think the government has to borrow or basically siphon off about 500 billion pesos to compete with, to remove that liquidity from the market. and dollar peso, we feel that if, and this is the big if we can adjust interest rates to sustainable levels, then we can go stronger from where we are, 55, 70 year end. But over the long run, because of the strength of the dollar, we will probably have a weaker currency. Having said that, I'd like to remind you that let's look at REER and not just the dollar peso rate. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your patience and your attention. And and I'll be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Toto, for a very insightful discussion on the peso, interest rates, and the Philippine economy. I'd like to open the floor for questions from the audience. No? Obviously, there are a lot of issues that were taken up here. And please, Junjun.
Mr. Tansingco, can you explain again why the U.S. Why the U.S. dollar is so strong, considering the problems of the U.S. economy?
Well, the simplest explanation is that they've brought their interest rate so high vis-a-vis the rest of the world. If you look at Japan, Japan still has negative interest rates. If you look at Euro, it's still close to zero. The peso, while we have positive interest rates, is still below historical norms. And we've identified that historical norm to be about 3.8%. So the peso interest rates have to be at around 3.8% higher than the dollar rates, or else we will have capital outflow. I mean, if you look at us, why will you invest well, if you were just a passive investor, why will you invest in the Philippines if one, your inflation is higher than the US? Number two is your interest, excess interest yield you take in the Philippines is not worth putting here. You just have capital flow, and it's just the flow of capital from the Philippines to the US, and that is what we're encountering now. And that's why we were saying you have to bring that differential wider to arrest that flow. And I think the central bank is on the right track as far as bringing interest. No amount of intervention can prevent that. I hope I addressed your question.
Yeah.
Incentive for business to start the expansion.
That is true, but I think we have to take it into a concept that we've lived through 6% interest rates. We've lived through 8% interest rates. As long as it is not permanent, it is transitory, and when we can adjust our interest rates back, as long as we can keep inflation in check, right? Yes, it will invariably slow down economy, but it's a balancing act between interest rates, economic activity, inflation, which while inflationary spending has a lot of economic activity, it is actually eroding the value of what we're earning. So that is also not good. And capital flow, meaning money staying in the keeping in the Philippines and staying in the Philippines. And I think that that's the balancing act that I really don't want to be a central banker now that they have to contend with.
Thank you. Tito, I'll get to you. I just, June Palafox asked if he could, he's on Zoom basically, and he wanted to ask a question. So after June, it'll be Tito and then
H
George.
before dash.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Philip.
June, please.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Tansingco, thanks for sharing. Very insightful, informative. Question is, if you crystal ball the future, when will the Philippines make it to the first world? Or will we ever make it? Thank you, sir.
Our per capita income is around maybe $4,000. Our first world country, I think, is around 25. So it will be several generations before we get to that level. But no, not several, at least a generation, I would think, before we would get to. But having said that, we've seen a generation pass us by. Less than 10 years ago, we were like, maybe about 15 years ago, we were like 1,000, and now we're 3,000. In 10 years, if we can go to 8,000-9,000, will be a rich middle class, upper middle class economy. So I think that slowly but steady, well, unless we can do something like a China, 9% growth. But right now, with the structure of our economy, it will require, something revolutionary, like, I don't know.
So one generation is 25 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
But it took Singapore actually one generation to get there, right? We look at them now where they are, but they started that journey in the 70s, and they were only perhaps a solid first world country, maybe late 80s, early 90s. So one generation is quick. If we can get there, that will be great.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Tito, please, and then George.
My question, Mr. Tansingco, is we're facing a budget deficit regime, I think, in the next few years. No? And yet, we have to continue infrastructure projects, continue spending for the government overhead, etc. With the trillion peso debt level, where do you think can government avail of more loans to be able to fund? In fact, in your estimate, it's a trillion peso budget deficit this year. And we're now facing even a higher budget of 5.25 that was just being deliberated now by Congress. No? So it's even higher than last year by around 5%.
Yes.
Where will we get the wherewithal, to fund this kind of budget?
Yes. Yeah, thank you for that question. The solution to any budget deficit is really growth. We have to grow the economy faster than we grow debt. Because debt per se is not bad. And as businessmen, I think you know this. You invest now as long as it gives you benefits in the future, you can easily pay off that debt, right? An economy, a country is similar also in that its deficit now, we don't have a balance sheet. A country does not have a balance sheet, but it has debt. And if you can bring that debt level to a comfortable fraction of the economy, then it is sustainable. And the index right now is around 60% debt to GDP. So as long as we can keep debt, no matter how much we borrow, as long as we can grow faster and we can keep debt to GDP at 60 and below, I think that's very sustainable. The bad part is if we continue spending and then it doesn't translate to economic activity. If the spending, sorry. Yes.
GDP contracted by 12%, of course.
Yes.
Let's understand the pandemic was there. But you have just racked up 8 trillion in debts in the last 6 years.
Yes, correct.
And our GDP has remained almost flat, assuming we're able to get back with this 12% growth that we've been seeing now. No?
Correct.
And so again, the ratio of 60% is very hard to maintain, considering that GDP growth is not an instant gratification type of thing, right?
Yes, correct, sir. Our debt to GDP prior to the pandemic was at the mid-40s to high 40s. Now, because of the spending, because we had to keep our people alive, if we didn't spend that, they would be going out on the streets and looking for jobs, and we did the lockdown. So, you know, that 1 trillion, yes, it was not productive because it was not spending to build capacity. It was spending to keep our people alive. It's like, you know, if you run out of money and then you withdraw from the ATM to spend for food rather than, you know, borrow to buy a factory or something. That was the situation. So it was an emergency situation.
I appreciate all of these things, but
Yes, sir.
please analyze that even before the pandemic came, we had already racked up so much debt, and yet GDP stayed almost flat. Where did that all that money go? This is what I wish economists and bankers could.
Well, yes, that there is. I'm not a political scientist, but in fairness to the government, there were good numbers. We were running 6% growth, and our debt wasn't actually growing that. So our debt to GDP was actually very manageable. Yes, it might not be equally distributed, and I think that's I think a struggle of our economy, that it's not broad-based. It's not equally distributed, but the headline numbers and even the government finances did show that it was a bit sustainable, because we were 45, 48 debt to GDP prior to the pandemic. So, you know, at that level, we were investment grade. So yeah, that's a concern that I think all of us have to be vigilant about.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
George. George.
I'm George Barcelon. I just have a few questions. Thank you for enlightening us on the numbers on inflation, exchange rate. Well, in answer to our good friend here, Mr. Panlilio, a good part, I think, of the debt also went to the infrastructure. Of course, a lot of debt also went elsewhere. But having said that, I just like to have you elucidate on us regarding inflation, because inflation is on top of mind, you know, all regions of the world. Europe is, UK is experiencing 10% or more. Same thing as in Europe. The US is also, they've never broken, I think, 7-8% inflation. Same thing for us, at least we're lower. But if you think back, you know, this inflation, it was a series of events. First, the Wuhan lockdown, when they start finding out they have SARS, so they closed down the port. The shipping got entangled. And then you have the Suez issue, okay? And that really complicate matters, okay? And because of this supply chain issue, prices started to go up. And the last one really that hit us hard was the geopolitical issue in Russia and Ukraine war, okay? Because the oil was badly affected, food commodities such as wheat is badly affected. Even at one point in time, when the energy fuel was going up, Indonesia had in mind to clamp down on their export to their coal. And we were worried because 75% of our power plant depends on the Indonesian coal. Okay? But having said that, we're not the only country facing this headwind on the inflation. And partly it's not caused by us. Partly it's caused imported because of the geopolitical situation. And I would think that hopefully the key lies in the settlement of this geopolitical war in Europe. Okay? When, we don't know. I mean, there's threat of Russia, you know, stopping the gas to Germany. And, you know, there will come a time, I think, sooner or later, this has to be worked out. And with that, how do you project the lowering of our inflation? Okay, because the inflation, I think, partly is caused by that. Of course, here we have artificial inflation, such as the price of sugar. That's artificial. Okay? And one time when our inflation went up was primarily because there was a shortage of rice. And we had to import a lot of rice. And that caught about a blip of about 100 basis points. So I just like for you, you have your crystal ball, you have your background to share with us if the geopolitical situation were to improve, what would be the impact on inflation? Okay. One thing for us that's going well is because we do have about 33 billion, 34 billion remittances, and that's still very healthy. It's still growing. Export, not so much because of the supply chain, the cargo issues and everything. But as of, when you look at it, I know the exchange rate, we're mirroring the US rate. But there is a point, I think, that doesn't mean if the differential is too small, money will go out. Because if you have confidence in our country's economy, there are investment. People are investing in land, in setting up factories. So I would beg to differ that if the differential is too small, money would go out. I'm just sharing you my point, but I'd like for you to share with us, your prognosis on how this will go, depending on what events. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that question. I do agree that the geopolitics play a big role because of energy, but you're also very right that the big impact is a lot of confluence of a lot of things. And that's why I showed a slide of recent events, the normalization of China. That has actually caused inflation because China stopped, they're locked down. They cannot produce, right? So the prices from China are going up. The shipping that you mentioned, and that Indonesia protecting their coal, that's exactly what I was saying. The beggar thy neighbor. I don't care about the rest of the world. I'll protect my own. So that's correct. Energy is about 20%. Energy and energy linked is around 20% of our inflation rate or CPI. So if that part is solved, that probably 20%, let's say oil divides by 2, then that impacts our CPI maybe 0.1, well, 1% or something, or yeah. So that is the big impact. But as you correctly pointed out, sir, there's a lot of other things that has to fall into place for our inflation to go down. And you're right that as long as we start investing, we'll continue. And so I wanted to put a hopeful note. As long as we believe in our country and keep our money here, we're okay. Unfortunately, capital is very fluid right now. And all of us would have faith, but they're still in the periphery, siphoning off, and that's causing the pressure and actually making it harder for the ones left behind to operate, right? If your currency devalues very often, how can you price your goods? How can you project? How can you plan? So you're right, sir. It's a very good point, and thank you for that insight. Yes. Yes. Correct. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's we put the sequence. Cesar.
Yeah. Mr. Tansingco,
Hi, sir.
you have demonstrated the different factors that's affecting the economy of the country. But this is part of your Metro Bank's thinking.
Yes, sir.
And that means it'd be easier to borrow from your bank.
We're here to serve, sir.
Can we apply now?
I'd refer to our director, Mr. Sullivan. He's the approver.
Cesar, for you, I'll think about it. Anyway, thank you, Cesar. Jolion next.
Mr. Tansingco, you said that the government will have to wipe out excess liquidity to be able to contain inflation. And we'll have to raise interest rates as well. Now, both of these will tend to slow down economic activity. And yet your crystal ball shows that GDP is still, I think, 2 percentage points ahead of inflation. Where do you see the productivity coming from? Because it's the only way you can stay ahead. You know, like when you're reducing the amount of assets being employed, and yet you're producing more. So where is the productivity coming from?
Yes, sir. Actually, the government is using liquidity or wiping out. We're saying they will probably siphon off about $500 billion today, because they have to finance their huge fiscal deficit. So they're collecting much less tax than they are spending. So they have to fill that hole with borrowing. Good thing about it is that when they spend it, it goes to the economy. Government is actually a big part of our GDP. So if you put that money in, that money goes back to the economy as the government spends. It's not like a central bank activity when they siphon liquidity and just put it in their vaults. Government borrowing, as long as they spend it productively, not inflationarily, but productively, can actually be good. In fact, what is the US doing right now? They passed a $2 trillion stimulus, right? And they're saying that, okay, they can use that so that hopefully the economy grows, and that with the economic activity, they can pay off that debt or run it indefinitely. So government spending per se is not bad. What will contain inflation? Inflation can be contained by the behavior. So the marginal activity that cannot hurdle the interest rates will have to be stopped. Unfortunately, that will also require less consumption on our part. If people consume less, then inflation, because of higher interest rates, will also go down. So that is the interplay. Is it good? Is it good that our people are consuming less? Maybe some. Maybe there's some spending that we shouldn't really be doing. But on the other hand, it also will cause some pain. So the way out of this situation is not painless. It will come with higher interest rates. It will come with perhaps a bit of volatility. But as long as we steady the course, I think that we will get through it properly.
Thank you. President Michael.
Mr. Tansingco, I'm talking about agriculture because the president wants to focus on agriculture. I think agriculture is very important for us because we need to protect our food basket from 2 things. One, strategic stocks. We need to have strategic stocks. Second, we need to have food to control inflation. And I'm not sure the government is really focusing on that because, you know, if a country like Thailand decides not to stop import, what will the Philippines do? You know, and countries today, Indonesia stopped exporting of rice, and countries are moving to protect their own food security. And right now, the Philippines is deficit on almost all the food. Rice, sugar, etc., etc. On the matter of sugar, I just wanted to say that there is a miscommunication. The lobby of the Negros congressman, that's a solid block, and that is for sugar, right? So that cannot be ignored, but it's a solid block. But what is happening today is that we have some stocks in raw sugar, but all our industrials need refined. And none of the refineries are running because it's not yet harvest time. So sugar prices continue to go up. And the president says there is no sugar shortage, but it's, you know, we have sugar, but it cannot be consumed because it's in raw form. So there's a lot of miscommunication. And I just think that as a country, we should stock up on essential commodities for bad times to protect the poorest of the poor. I wonder if Metro Bank gives long-term debt. We borrow from you, right? But it's always short-term. I wonder if in agriculture you can, I believe in the IPP, government-private sector partnership. But if the banks can lend us long-term money to really secure strategic supplies for this country.
Well, I think that Metrobank is actually a commercial bank, and we actually finance trade, inventory, short term. I think we're open to financing factories, project finance, but for buffering, I think that should be something like a DBP. That's something that a government agency, because at the end of the day, we're really custodians of our depositors, and our efforts are really to safeguard our deposit base. But something like that, I think, is necessary, and for most countries, that's done by the development banks, like Development Bank of Singapore, and in China, they have a development bank. Unfortunately, our development bank here maybe need to be a lot more effective in doing strategic moves like that. But you're right, sir. We really have, and we have to address that concern, which I mentioned earlier, the beggar thy neighbor philosophy that's now prevalent in the world. They will not bat an eyelash, no matter how long we're friends. If it's between us and them, they will shut it off. So it's very critical, like you said, that we protect ourselves as well. I totally agree, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Ming.
And which, of course, pertains to banks. Interest rates, of course, have been going up, and I'm sure your lending rates have been going up. My question is really, why have you not adjusted your interest rates on deposits, particularly? Because this would be those that would have greater impact on people who are normally not able to access government securities or funds. They rely on savings, simple savings account, maybe simple time deposits, and yet the banking system has not really adjusted its own rates offered to these kind of investors who really need this kind of yield.
Yes, sir. I think we're trying to address that through other instruments, because actually deposit taking in banks is very expensive. As Philip was discussing, the cost of compliance of taking a deposit is very, very high. We have anti-money laundering. We have agri-agra lending. So any deposit we take, we have to put 25% of it to agri-agra, of which the default rates are very high. So those are the constraints. Our strategy right now for investors is we have a wealth management business. And for wealth management, it's better invested in, as you say, government securities, bonds. We're trying to democratize that. Like, for example, with 5,000 pesos, you can open a UITF with Metrobank. And that 5,000 pesos will yield as much as if you would put 100 million pesos. So that's our way of democratizing investments. Unfortunately, the reality is deposits are no longer, the investment is no longer an investment instrument. It is a liquidity instrument that you will use for your working accounts. Our time deposits will no longer be competitive because of the high cost of compliance. What we're offering as an alternative, which is also part of the business that I oversee, is wealth management, government securities, trust, UITFs, mutual funds, and those. And if you look at the world, right, that's really how the US is. Most investors don't really go to the bank to deposit. They would go to mutual funds. The mutual fund industry in the US is much bigger than the banking industry.
Yeah, I'm really, thank you for your reaction. I'm really referring to small investors. That's why I'm talking about financial inclusion.
Yes, sir.
And in fact, if you go to your funds, like any other bank, you charge actually a management fee
Yes, sir.
of usually 1.5% or 1% maybe, which of course would even further erode whatever yields that they would get.
Yes.
And if you're talking about cost of operating a bank, I think the banking system has been registering record profits as well. So, I mean, it's kind of inconsistent with that particular notion. So the point I'm trying to make is that I think the banking system, particularly the very big banks, should also do their own share, trying to provide or have greater distribution of, call it wealth,
Yes, sir.
particularly among the smaller investors. I mean, people who really would not have a clue how to do an investment in a fund.
Yes, sir.
I mean, who would want to, they wouldn't understand to begin with. I mean, that's the only point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Of course, Mr. Matoto is the one of the esteemed experts in banking, and I do respect that point of view. I think as to our record profits, you have to look at our ROE are still single digit, despite the high headline income of the bank, because of the excessive amount of capital that our central bank says you have to keep. Our ROE is maybe 9%. We're just breaking 10%. I'm sure for a risky enterprise, that probably might not be worth your while, right? So that, but we are trying to democratize, sir, maybe not in the deposits, but I'll take a look at it because.
When was the last time interest rates on deposits were raised?
As an industry, I think recently people moved savings rate up because of the higher the rate hikes. I think it would be probably a quarter or 3/8. Yes. Overnight central bank rate is 3.5. Yes. Yes. Yes, sir. Thank you. That's noted.
Thank you. We've got Winston and then Andrew.
I won't put you under the sun, okay? This is from a very biased exporter asking a question, okay? And I just wanted your opinion. Forever in the day, I've always wondered why when 9.5 million OFWs bring dollars in, so they are automatically protected from any devaluation. The BPO industry is, I don't know, what, 10%, 15% of our industry. It's a huge part. So between the two of them, you're talking about 9.5 times 4.5, that's 40+ million people. Your half of the population is actually a devaluation proof.
Yes.
And if you look at all the successful nations that have gone from poor to from Japan to Korea to Taiwan to China, they've all done undervaluing their currency. And I've always been so perplexed, Mr. President, at the thought that we as a country were just entry-level middle income, and yet we are looking at 109 in comparison to our exchange, our value of our peso compared to 10 years ago, correct? So what's the use of an overvalued peso on a country that's trying to get itself out of developing poor country to middle income and eventually to first world?
Yes.
Have we been doing the wrong policies of just being too protective on our exchange rate? And at the end of the day, we're undervaluing our imports and overvaluing our exports to the point that imports are more competitive than our exports. And I'm just saying that I've seen that, this 10% devaluation that we've had this past 6 months is the greatest devaluation in almost 18 years.
Yes, sir.
And it just doesn't make sense to me when an entry-level country is so proud of 109 overvalued currency. I just wanted your opinion.
Yes, sir, that is correct. Maybe we were a bit too tight on our FX, but I think that to a certain extent, that was also a bit of pride and also lack of confidence in our by our regulators on letting our currency devalue, because they've been there before when it went down and they were never able to contain it. But hopefully with, as you know, as if you have a small economy, it's very easy to push around, but we're no longer a small economy. We're actually a middle income economy. And in terms of gross GDP, not GDP per capita, but gross GDP, I think we're top 30 already in the world. So as our economy becomes bigger, I think that we will have more confidence and hopefully we can have true values. But as we've been discussing, as Mr. Escaler mentioned, when you are not secure, then you load up. And that's what we did. We loaded up on foreign exchange because we didn't have that confidence. But as we gain confidence, like right now, we're okay to erode our GIR to protect the peso. I think that that will come with maturity. And hopefully we can see that confident. You know, the US does not maintain an international reserve. They're just confident that their currency is convertible. And a lot of countries don't maintain international reserves. Hopefully, we will get to that level. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Tansingco. So I guess I want to preface my question with the fact that as Metrobank, you have a soapbox that the government listens to and that a lot of people listen to, right? So you're a strong advocate for government policy, right? Like what you say matters to people. So I guess the question I have is, you know, when you look at a lot of the causes of inflation, right? You mentioned China, you mentioned the war in Russia, you mentioned COVID and all the shutdowns, Indonesia, a lot of things that are contributing to inflation. This monetary policy, right? These aren't questions of the amount of liquidity out there, right? This is really a matter of fiscal responses, right? You would need more investment and all of these. So using your soapbox, why are you advocating for a monetary response in the form of higher interest rates that will affect the economy, instead of advocating for, like, you know, we need more investment, we need to invest in renewable energy so we don't have to import coal, we need to invest in agriculture so we don't have sugar shortages, we need to invest in more public transportation so there's not so many people needing gasoline. Like, why isn't that what you're advocating? Like, why do you choose to advocate for higher interest rates that will just hurt a lot of poor people instead of advocating for something like more investment that will both reduce inflation and help the country?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And that's very true. I mean, in a perfect world, we would like to, that is the real permanent solution of our problem. Unfortunately, when you're in government, I mean, a lot of us think that they have so many levers. But in reality, the BSP has only one lever, the overnight rate. That's their only monetary lever. And even the Fed has only one lever. So, you know, it's like trying to steer a ship and you only have one lever to do it. And that's why at this point in time, the only thing that the BSP can move is either putting more regulation, which will be bad for all of us because it will promote inefficiency, or an open market response, which is moving interest rates. So I think that that is the limitation of government, despite, you know, a lot of us thinking that, oh, they can flick a finger and put inflation. In reality, government-led initiatives have, and I might be controversial, but historically been inefficient. From power to transport, look at the MRT, it really has to be the private sector. And as captains and industries here, I think you guys are the key, not the government. I think what we hope that the government is to keep the field level, to keep us having stability, that when we make an investment, we can count on our investment decisions for the next 10, 20 years and not all of a sudden have a change. So the government is not the key. The government can only move markets to correct levels, but the real initiative will come from us.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more questions? We have time for actually just one more question. Yes, George.
Just an observation.
Yes, sir.
The banks most of the banks are doing very well. Okay. And what surprised me, even the Banco Central did very well. 2020, they had a bottom line of 32 billion. In 2021, they increased that by 33%. The Banco Central has a bottom line of 42 billion. So earlier you were talking about compliance, right? And that is where they have a lot of, for the banking sector, they do charge a hefty penalty. And our group is meeting BSP Governor Felipe Medalla, and this is something that we want, our concern from the private sector, just to air it out. Has the Banker Association shared their concern on this?
In several forums, yes, we have tried to rationalize banking because if we remove a lot of the barriers for making lending efficient, like we have the highest reserve requirement in Asia, I think in one of the highest in the world. We have one of the highest capital requirements. Yes, we would probably be able to lower our income would probably look better if we didn't have to carry. We're carrying 400 billion of capital in Metrobank just to operate. So that 30 billion that we're making is not even 9%. So it's really the environment that we really have to deregulate, but deregulate in a fair level that I think all of us will enjoy. But yeah, yes, there's a lot of work that have to be done, and I hope you can carry the message, sir. So he's a very nice guy. We've had dinner with him, and he's very open. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's give Toto a big round of applause. I mean, this is a great session. And thank you for answering all the questions and enlightening us on what's going on in the Philippine economy, interest rates, and currency. We'd like to, before you go, we'd like to, as a token of our appreciation, we'd like to offer you, Mike, some of the mementos that we, Oh, okay. President's response. Sorry, before we do that. My bad.
Thank you for Governor to Mr. Tansingco for a very informative talk on what is happening in our economy and what needs to be done. I think the interest of our members here, many, and you listening to them may hopefully bring us to a better place, right? And I just wanted to thank you because we are very enlightened by what you talked about. Thank you. Can we offer a gift of appreciation for your talk today? Our annual handbook for presidents. 5 years. In the back of my Okay, as your chief servant of the Makati Rockwell, is getting adjourned.